Tired of a sucky customer experience? Ain't everybody? Now, customer experience can be one of the toughest things to get right. But one of the easiest ways to improve your customer experience is to add a virtual agent or a chatbot. Now, this could be to your e-commerce store, to your website, to your Facebook page, on a whole bunch of other channels. Specifically, today we're going to be going through how to add a customer service chatbot to your Shopify store. So if you've got a Shopify store, a customer would be able to enter in their order number and get the status of their order in return. Ideally, boosting your customer experience by a whole heap. Let's get to it. So we're going to start off within our Shopify store. Now, if you've already got a Shopify store, all you need to do is log in into the backend and you'll be able to see what I'm looking at the moment. Now, I've got a couple of dummy orders within my store. That's going to be important because ideally what we're going to be taking a look at is trying to get back the status from each one of these orders. So we're really going to be taking a look at payment and fulfillment, as well as whether or not that particular order has been confirmed. Now, there's a few moving parts, so let's take a quick look at how this is all going to fit together. Now, there's a couple of moving parts to this tutorial. What you need set up as a prerequisite is an IBM Cloud account and a Shopify store. That way we've got everything ready to go once we're ready to go. Let's get back to it. Now, the first thing that we're going to be doing is creating API access to our Shopify store. So API access is going to allow us to get the order status, get the fulfillment status, and a whole bunch of other goodness. What we're going to be doing to test that API is we're going to be using Postman. So Postman's a free app. You can use it and you can do a whole bunch of really cool stuff with it. So we're going to be testing all of our APIs using Postman and just to make sure everything works. So first things first, let's create this API access. So in order to create API access, we need to create a private app. So to do that, we can go into apps and then we can go to manage private apps and then create a new private app. And we're just going to call this Watson Assistant. Watson Assistant. Oh, yeah, that'll work. And then we'll just type in developer email. So I'll just type in my own email. And then we just need to make sure that we've got API access to our orders. So if you expand that and just scroll down, we just want to go to orders, transactions, and fulfillments. And we just need to go read access. So if we change that that status from no access to read access, that will allow us to grab the information that we need. All right, and then if we scroll all the way down and just hit save, then create app. Perfect, so we've now just created API access to our store. Now, from within this panel, we've actually got a really, really simple integration path. So we just need to copy this URL. Be careful not to share these API details to anyone else. You don't want these going around. I'm showing them here, but this store will be gone. So just grab that particular URL and we're going to jump into Postman. And what you can do is you can test out that URL. So that particular string that we've got is going to allow us to get API information to all of our orders. So if we take that URL and just hit send, you can see we've got all the information for all of our orders. Now there's only two, so if we collapse this, you can see that we've only got 2 orders in here, but that's all well and good. That gives us the information that we're going to need. Now, each one of these orders actually has an order ID attached to it. We're going to use that order ID to check our order status from our Watson Assistant once we set that up. Now, we can actually use that order ID to query just a single order using a similar URL to what we're seeing up here. So what we'll do is we'll take this order ID and we'll just add in or remove JSON, add in another slash, paste that order ID, and then just add in JSON after that. And now we've got the status for that single order. So if you can see here, we've only got a single order now. So this particular string is what we're going to be using in our function or our webhook in order to query our Shopify store. Now let's jump onto that. So in order to create our function, we just need to step into IBM Cloud. Now from IBM Cloud, we can just type in functions and select this
function service. So this is going to allow us to create or use serverless functions and build webhooks to start building a bunch of integration. So we've already got a service set up, so we just need to hit start creating. And when we create our webhook, we're just going to select an action. And we're going to call this Shopify function. And we'll change our runtime to Python. So if you're more comfortable coding in JavaScript or Ruby or Swift or PHP or even Go, feel free to change it to whatever you want. We're going to use Python to sort of stick with the theme of the channel and hit create. Now there is a little bit of code involved here, but it's pretty simple. So really all we're going to be doing here is we're going to use our Python code to make a request out to our Shopify API, and then we're going to bring back some information and return that as a result if we're successful. So in order to do that, we're going to need a few extra libraries. So we're going to import requests, and we're also going to import JSON. Now, remember, when we made our API call, we actually sent through an order ID as part of that request. We want to be able to make that same API call, but dynamically pass through the order ID to this function. Now we can do that using parameters. So we're just going to change this argument to params. And when we test this out, we'll be able to pass through an order ID and send that through to our URL. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to create a variable for our URL, and that variable is going to be this entire string that we created from our Shopify store. So we'll create a variable, we'll just call it URL. Now, rather than leaving our order ID here, we're actually going to pass that through as a parameter. So we're just going to change that. And we're going to apply some string formatting there. And we're going to, remember we said we were going to create a parameter, and that parameter is going to have an order ID. So when we access or when we pass through that parameter, which we'll take a look at in a second, we're actually going to be passing that order ID through to this URL. We've got an extra one there, through to this URL, and we're effectively going to be recreating this request. Now that we've got that URL, we actually need to make a request, and this is where the requests library comes in, the one that we imported up here. So we're going to make our request from Shopify, so we'll add in a comment. And we're going to make a request. And we're going to request that URL. Now, we want to do a little bit of error checking when we're passing the results of this web action. So we're going to just make sure that our status code is correct. So a status code of 200 is a valid request, no errors. Anything apart from that is probably going to be an error. So we're going to just set up our conditions like that. So we're going to say if r.statuscode doesn't equal 200, then we're going to return an error. So we're going to say status code equals status code, and we'll also include our headers. And then we'll include the body of our response as well. And this is really just going to be the message that we want to send back. And we're just going to send back a message saying there's an error. Error processing your request. All right, so that's handled our errors. Now we need to handle our positive response. So if we have no issues, then we're going to return a similar message. So let's just copy this. Except this time, rather than returning an error, we're just going to pass our response. So for that, we're going to use the JSON library to process that. So we can type in json.loads, and that's going to return a valid JSON object for the body of our request. And we can delete this line down here. Perfect. So that's really it in terms of our function. So this will now allow us to make a call to our Shopify store, get some information back, and bring that back. Eventually, we're going to pass that through to our Watson Assistant. So let's quickly test that out. So we'll save it. And then what we'll do is we'll invoke it with parameters. Now remember we said we're going to pass through the order ID. We can do that by typing in order ID and then passing through the order ID that we want. In this case, we'll use this one and we'll paste that there. So if we hit apply, we can then make that API call. So let's double check that works. And you can see we've got the status from our order. So we've got our order, we've got whether or not it's been cancelled, whether or not it's been confirmed, all that good stuff. So that's great. So our function currently works, but we also need to make sure that our function is available to be accessed from the web. So we can do that simply by going through to endpoints and selecting enable as web action. Then we just need to hit save. Then we can take this same function here, or this same URL, and again, let's test this out in Postman. So if we create a new request in Postman, paste that in here, we just need to pass through our parameter, and we're going to take this order ID here. And you can see that's worked perfectly fine, so that's looking good for now. So we've now set up our integration into Shopify, we've connected it to an IBM function. Now all we need to do is the easy bit. So set up the integration into Watson Assistant and then deploy. So we can do that. So let's go to IBM Cloud. And then what we'll do is we'll set up a new instance of Watson Assistant. So if we go to Catalog, then Services, then AI, and select Watson Assistant. Now what we're going to do is just choose the Plus trial pricing plan. There's a whole bunch of others. Choose whichever one you want, but Plus trial is going to be the easiest in terms of integration with Shopify later on. You can just copy your web script, makes your life super easy. We're just going to do that for now. So let's select Plus trial and hit create. And then we'll select launch Watson Assistant. And then select my first skill. Then what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to extract an order ID whenever a customer enters that into our assistant. So we can do that using pattern matching with entities. So if we create a new entity, we'll just create an entity and we'll call it order ID. If we hit create there, we can then create a new one. And then this is where the pattern matching comes in. So if we select patterns, and then we just need to type in a little bit of regex, so it's pretty simple. So every single order ID that we get from Shopify is going to be 13 digits. So in this case, we're just going to do a match for that. So we'll include a caret, then a digit. So then we want to look for 13 digits, and then we'll finish that off. So if we add that there, now when we test out our assistant, it should be able to pick up those 13 digits for an order ID. So as soon as this finishes training, we should be able to test that out. So we can now take our order ID that we had up here and paste it here. So you can now see we've now picked up our entity, which is order ID. We can then take this order ID and use it within our dialog. So if we step back, we can go to dialog. And then we're going to keep this pretty simple. So we'll add a node and we'll call that node order status. Now, what we want to do is we want to check if our assistant has detected an order ID. And if that is the case, then we're going to return back the status. So we'll call out to our webhook, we'll get that status, and then we're going to return a result. But first up, let's make sure we can handle this order ID. So if this particular node sees an order ID, let's just respond order ID detected. So now if we paste that in here, You can see we've detected our order ID. So that's all working fine. So we've got our dialog set up. We can detect an order ID. Now what we need to do is make sure we can integrate with our webhook. So we created our function. We set it up as a webhook or enabled it as a web action. Now what we want to do is we just want to be able to make sure that we can access that webhook using what's in a system. To do that, all we need to do is take this same URL that we used here and go to options within our assistant, paste our URL in here. Then if we go back to our dialog, we can make a call out to that webhook, which is the same as us making a request using Postman. So once we step into our order status node, we can select customize, turn on webhooks, hit apply. And then remember, we want to send through our parameter to our webhook, which is going to be our order ID. So what we need to do is make sure we send out a parameter. So in this case, it's going to be order ID. And then we want to be able to extract our order ID that our user has input. So to do that, we're just going to use a bit of spell. So we can enter in a left bracket, question mark, order ID, and then we can access the value using .literal. So we're accessing the literal property. Then that will allow us to grab our order ID, and then let's make sure that we can pass this webhook result. So we'll delete that last bit of text that we were responding with, which is order ID detected. We can remove that. We don't need that anymore. And then we're just going to initially return success if we make a call to our API successfully, and fail if we have any issues. All right, let's try that out. So let's paste in our order ID again. And success. All right, so we've managed to successfully query our webhook. So now what we want to do is just return some of those values back to our user. So what we can do is we can step into our webhook result node, and this is going to be the result if we're successful. Rather than leaving in success, we're going to type in status for order, and then we should probably return back the order ID. So we'll grab the order ID, and then we'll return the literal. Then we also want to add in whether or not the order's been confirmed. So we can grab that from our webhook result. So again, we'll use some spell. We're going to add in a question mark and then access the order. So this is just navigating the JSON response that we're getting back from our order status. So we're going to access the order and then grab whether or not it's been confirmed. And then what we'll also return back is whether or not it's been fulfilled and whether or not it's been paid. So let's check whether or not it's been paid. And paid is accessible through the financial status attribute. So let's grab the financial status attribute, and then whether or not the order's been fulfilled is available through fulfillment status. So let's grab that. Perfect. So now the response that we should get back, assuming we have a successful API call, is the order ID, whether or not it's been confirmed, and the financial status and the fulfillment status. So that's looking all good. Let's save that. And let's test this out again. So ultimately, if we have a successful API call, rather than just receiving success, we'll now receive all those details that we had within this particular node here now. So let's copy our order ID, paste that in. You can now see we have, looks like that confirm node's got some issues. Let's double check that. Should be changing this to fulfilled. Perfect. All right, let's try that again. So we're probably still not going to get any results back because our order hasn't actually been fulfilled. So let's try that out though. Perfect, so we've got whether or not it's been confirmed, whether or not it's paid, and whether or not it's fulfilled. Let's actually go in and fulfill that order, and we'll see the status change. So it's this one, and we'll mark it as fulfilled. Then if we come back and test that out again, you can see that our order is now being fulfilled. So in real time, we're now getting live status updates. Now, the last thing that we want to do is integrate this back into our Shopify store. So we can do that pretty easily. So we just need to go into our assistant, step back in, and then select Add Integration. And for this integration, we're just going to use web chat. So we'll leave our integration. Well, actually, we'll change our integration. We'll call it Shopify, and we'll hit create. Then all we need to do is scroll down to this chat UI script, copy that. Then if we go back into our Shopify store, what we need to do is go to online store, and then select actions, choose edit code, and then we just need to find the index liquid file. So if we select that, all we need to do is paste in our script there, save it. Then if we hit preview, you can now see that our assistant is now popping up. So if we added in our order ID, let's copy that again. And pasted that in. We're now able to get our order status for each one of those orders. And that about wraps up this tutorial on how to integrate What's an Assistant with your Shopify store.
Thanks so much for going through this tutorial. Hopefully you learned something new. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, share, and subscribe it. And if you've got any questions at all, be sure to drop a question in the comments below. Peace.